Chuck, it's great to see you today.
Great to see you, Jason.
So, Chuck, you were a squadron leader in the Navy SEALs, SEAL Team 6, and you're watching this war very carefully since it began. And to me, it looks like the Russians are having a lot of problems. They say that they're advancing on all fronts, but that doesn't seem to be factual. What are you noticing right now?
Well, one of the things that has stood out for a while and is standing out in particular at this moment is Russians, they do attack everywhere during the course of the day. At any point along the zero line, within 5 or 6 kilometers, the Russians have staged attacks within 5 or 6 kilometers of each other, which is precisely the distance at which these disjointed attacks cannot support each other. And the other thing that the Russians are unable to do is launch, for example, they have bulged out north of the town of Pokrovsk and south of it. But what they are unable to do is what every Allied and even Axis army could do in World War II, which was close a pincher operation, right? Combined arms maneuver warfare. The Russians started this summer offensive with 170,000 troops poured into Ukraine. They've lost 210,000 since May, and that is the low end of the estimates that go up to 310,000 casualties. But we're seeing it now that Russia is not capable of, for example, converging to the west of Chasiv Yar on a town called Stenke, believe it or not, is the name of that town. They haven't been able to do that for 24 months. And now in Pokrovsk, we're seeing losses accelerate. They're not able to take Pokrovsk. And now they're pouring anywhere from 30 to 60,000 more people into Pokrovsk. And I don't think it's going to work.
Well, it's unlikely to work given their track record so far, which is part of the problem that Russia has is that not only is this not working, but they're not changing their tactics. They're not changing their strategy. It seems they're just doing the same thing again and again, beating their head against the wall and expecting a different outcome each time. Or have you seen some sort of shakeups? Do you see them trying some sort of innovative strategies this time around?
Well, one of the things that is going on here, and most military commentators are not grasping this the Russian forces are so badly trained and so badly led that they're incapable of doing anything more sophisticated than a small scale frontal attack. And every one of these attacks, wherever it is staged by the Russians, they lose between 30 and 80% of their forces in the first 1 hour of contact. Sobering, right? For a U.S. Army unit to be, quote, defeated, doctrine says you lose 20% of your men, you're defeated. These Russian forces are losing 80, 90, in some cases 100% of the attacking force. And we know that morale is through the floor. And by through the floor, I mean instances of fragging, direct disobedience in the vicinity of the Kremlin zone of operations. An entire Russian battalion has taken to the woods and is refusing to answer the radio or conduct military operations. We're going to see more of these slow motion mutinies. I promise you, this is going to be a very, very tough winter for Russia.
So, looking at this, how does the leadership of Russia and its military specifically understand what is going on? They must realize that the situation is getting further and further out of control, and it's not going to get better. Look at the attacks that we've seen on the oil refineries. Russia is now hard up for oil. We've seen the huge gas lines throughout Russia as well. They're spreading pretty quickly. But more than that, Russia today is losing revenue. If it can't export oil, that means that they lose money. And the countries that are currently buying Russian oil are asking for more and more steep discounts. They want to get a good deal if they're going to be violating sanctions. And Russia cannot afford to keep playing this game. It simply doesn't have the assets necessary. But as you observed within the military itself, the men are under-equipped and under-trained. And in fact, the factories, the degree that there's corruption in the Russian military-industrial complex, specifically because people that work there are somehow, by chance, the same people who work in the military. That is, the generals own those factories. And those generals today are being persecuted by the FSB. The FSB today is putting Russian generals in jail. So the generals really aren't paying attention to the war as much as they are to the FSB, if the FSB is catching on to their corruption. If they might be the next general who gets locked up. And so it seems that for the Russian generals, things are not looking very good, which probably just adds more stress. But who in Moscow has the plan? How at this point do the Russians think they could turn this all around. What is their goal? How do they think that they could still take Kiev?
I don't think that's in the cards at all. I'm not sure that even Putin knows how bad it is. I do think his generals know at this point. Nobody wants to be the guy to walk to the 70-foot conference table and tell the boss how screwed up everything is. And I think the Russian military will do everything it can to pretend this problem doesn't happen, that isn't happening until the inevitable happens. So that news came to me just within the last 24 hours about the Russian forces around the Liman, Kremlin area. You've got a battalion, close to 1,000 guys, 500 guys. They've taken to the woods. They're not. They're not answering the radio. They're not maneuvering. They are just out of the war. You're going to find more and more of that. The first symptom of that is the decreased combat effectiveness, but we see that everywhere. Bad results, poor performance by the trained soldiers, abysmal corrupt leadership, and eventually you may not run out of people to ship from Siberia, but you're going to run out of a functioning army, right? You're going to run out. People are not going to listen to you anymore. Things are so bad, Jason. Look, there are murders of officers. There are desertions of entire tactical units. There is cannibalism. There is disease. There is everything you see in a defeated army. I'll just let that rest right here. And we'll see what happens this winter, where things are going to get much, much, much worse for the Russians.
I would tend to agree that cannibalism is a very good sign that there's low morale. Now, this winter, do you think that there's going to be some more problems? How are they going to be able to do this? At this point, a lot of people are saying that the Russians are grouping and preparing for a new offensive. But at the same time, as you observed, there's nothing that would indicate that's going to work out any better for them than anything else so far. Or what do you think is going to come with this? What is the real objective? Because quite obviously, this is going to also fail.
Well, when we hear there's going to be a Russian offensive, we think in our minds that a competent series of generals are going to move large tactical formations on the battlefield, converging on objectives. The Russians haven't been able to do that since the first weeks of the large-scale invasion. A Russian offensive at this point means you have a battalion and you send one platoon at a time to the front and they get wiped out. They get wiped out because they are attacking fixed and flexible Ukrainian defensive position. And generally, it takes 3 to 5 to 1 superiority at the point of attack. But if you've got, it doesn't matter if you have 10 Russian soldiers at the point of attack, if they're not smart enough to change the magazines on their rifles, if they haven't been fed in 3 days, if they know if they get wounded, they're not going to get evacuated. These are why, not only this is why their attacks fail, this is why every day you see dozens of video clips of Russian vehicles abandoned in the field, conveniently, inevitably, with all their hatches open. Why do they do that? So they do that so the Ukrainians will drop a bomb, mortar bomb, into the hatch and blow up their vehicle, and they don't have to get in it anymore. Those are the symptoms that are happening here. Every day, Russia loses 2 battalions of men, 500 people in a battalion, 1,000 people a day, 7 days a week. They lose 4 battalions of artillery, as many as 100 artillery tubes, day in and day out. It's unsustainable. No army in history, and I mean, go back to the Trojan Wars, has ever lost 2 battalions a day and won anything. It's not going to happen.
See, the part for me is just simply the insanity. And we've talked about this before, and I've asked you before, what is the logic to this? Because it's so obvious that it's not working. They continue doing the exact same thing, just needlessly, for no gain whatsoever. It's just absurd. And that's why it's so shocking. At first, when you read the numbers of casualties on the Ukrainian side that are estimated versus the Russian side, they're polar opposites. It's the Russians are taking massive losses. And it's not propaganda. It's because the Russians just are reckless and they're sending their men off to die needlessly. There's been no gain whatsoever. Or do you think that there is? Do you think that there's perhaps back in Moscow a general that does have a plan? That's something they're going to pull out of their hat at any point? Or is this just going to get worse?
They have no Omar Bradley, no General Grant, no General Sherman on the bench in Moscow who can come and turn this around. They just don't have it. And their problem is every day they're sending a platoon of guys up against Ukrainian forces. Look, they're dug in, they're in camouflage positions. They have hundreds of drones at their disposal. Just your rabid average rifle squad in Ukraine has got 20, 30, 40 drones. They've got artillery on call, and the Russians show up, and this is what I mean about poor combat effectiveness. Every morning at 10:30 a.m., the Russians show up, dragging kilometer-line dust plumes behind them. Here they come, same road they attacked on yesterday morning, yesterday afternoon, the day before that, and they get hosed. Everywhere that happens. There was this big breakthrough in Pokrovsk. Everyone had the fantods. It was unbelievable. Nobody reported that the breakthrough was in the wrong direction. Pokrovsk was to the south, and the Russians broke through to the north, which the Ukrainians have done on numerous occasions. You want to go the wrong direction? Come on down. And it shows how desperate the Russians are to report any sort of advance, whether it's in the wrong direction or not. And I think the Russian military is going to keep the lid on this problem as long as they can. And you've mentioned the FSB is now hunting Russian generals. We want that dynamic to continue, right? We want the FSB and the military leadership at odds. And face it, look, it's convergent evolution. They want to occupy the same ecological niche. They want to be in charge of the graft, the corruption. That's going to be another major problem that's going to doom this war. It's doomed already, I actually think.
I think it's also doomed, and it's sort of incredible that people, like Putin himself, actually believe that they're winning. There is no tangible evidence for that, which is always something we've talked about before as well. It is incredible. His delusion is believable, though. He does live in a bubble. But the fact that many people in the West still believe that Russia is winning, that's even harder to believe. There is so much evidence that comes out every single day. All the videos, all the data that shows that Russia's economy is collapsing. Its soldiers cannot survive on the front. Back at home, the country is becoming destabilized. So looking ahead, what should we be looking out for next? What's going to be happening in the next few weeks or months that we should be paying a lot of attention to?
I pay attention especially to the refinery strikes. These are elegantly conducted. This is a strategic bombing campaign, the first time in history that a nation without a strategic air force is attacking strategic targets. Watch those videos carefully because the Ukrainians are not just hitting random items in a refinery. They're hitting specific critical components. They hit the things that take 8 months to fix, where parts aren't available due to sanctions or those parts are in limited supply anywhere in the world. They're unplugging the Russian economy, which is, face it, no bucks, no Buck Rogers on the battlefield. That's what's going to happen. But also, you and I were just in Ukraine recently. It was a hot summer. It lingered into September, but the weather's cooling off and winter will be here. Then these Russian logistical problems on the front, they're going to be critical. You're a combat soldier, you need 5,000 calories a day. They're not going to get it. They're not going to have shelter. They're not going to have winter equipment, and things are going to go sideways.
Chuck, it sounds like there's a lot to look forward to. It's great talking with you as always.
Thanks. Talk to you soon, Jason.